on the computer. There we go. All right, well, welcome everybody. Thank you for being here. We're going to do, basically today is a review day, okay? We're basically gonna look over factoring, square root. We're gonna look over completing the square, and we're gonna look over the quadratic formula, and then we're gonna do one projectile motion question. So we're looking at a total of 5 questions that we're gonna be doing today. With that, basically, if we were in a normal schedule, what will be happening is that we would be reviewing for a test. Obviously, I'm not going to give you a test or nothing like that. Just continue with the quizzes. And like I mentioned earlier, the only assignment you'll have for this lesson that will be assigned today is only a quizzes, okay? No IXL. Want to put a side note that you can always go back and upgrade your IXL grades. So if you have a grade on IXL that you do not like, you can improve it. Send me a message when you have done that so I can update it. Just check your ETSFIs periodically. If you have any questions on a grade, please reach back out to me and we will fix it and do what we got to do for that. It is a lot of grading I have to do, so I can miss an IXL here or there or quizzes. And also, I want to mention again that if you're trying to do a quizzes that is past due, the code that I posted, it will not work. You have to ask for a new code. So hopefully, what that means is that you're doing your assignments late. Okay, so please make sure you're checking algebra. You're given an assignments 1 week in advance and 1 week ahead of when they're due. Okay, so make sure you're looking so that you're getting stuff done on time and not trying to do it late. All right, don't wait to see the 0 on the grade book for that to be the reason why you don't do the that's when you do the assignment. No, check beforehand, get it done beforehand. That way you're not having any issues with quizzes. If you have to do a past due quizzes, just send me a message. I will generate a new code and give it to you to do. All right, guys, let's get into some problems. The first one we're going to do is number 1 here, which is simply a factoring. So let's review how do we factor. The way to solve by factoring is we got to make sure that it's set to 0, which in this case it is. Notice that it is x squared minus 6x minus 40 equals 0. Okay. Then we want to see if it's factorable. So we're going to create our x. We're going to do a times c. That will be 1 times negative 40. So that gives me a negative 40 on top. All right. And then my b happens to be negative 6. What would be my factors? You can type them in on the chat. What 2 numbers when multiplied give me negative 40? When added, give me negative 6. Let's see who's the first one to be able to find those factors. What 2 numbers when multiplied give me negative 40? When added, give me negative 6. Go ahead and put it in the chat if you get it. All right. Excellent. Excellent. Good job. For those that were still working it out, you would have ended up with a negative 10 and 4. Negative 10 times 4 is negative 40. Negative 10 plus 4 is negative 6. Because a equals 1, we would simply do x minus 10, x plus 4. And then now, simply all we got to do here is set them equal to 0. We set them equal to 0. We solve for x. In this case, we add 10, so we end up with x equals 10. And over here, we subtract 4. So we end up with x equals negative 4. And that would be our answer, 10 and negative 4. So when you can factor it, you can go ahead and solve by simply setting your factors equal to 0 and solving, okay? So that's my example for factoring, pretty much straight to the point. If I ever move too fast, just tell me to slow down if you're copying this stuff down, guys, okay? All right. So let's move on to an example of a square root method. Quickly, type in on the chat, what would be the reason that we would use the square root method? What do we not have when we are, and the reason why we would use the square root method based on the short video that I asked you guys to watch. Okay. Good job. So you will see, Francisco posted there, that there is no B term on this one. There's no coefficient with an X. That's not 1X, that's not 48X. It's just a quadratic term, which is 4X squared, and two constants. So whenever that's the case, you want to use the square root method. Okay? So square root method means that we're going to solve for X squared, that we want to get X squared by itself. So in this case, instead of trying to move the 48 to the left and leave it equal 0, we actually want to move the -1 to the right side because we're trying to isolate the X squared. So I'm going to add 1, right? And I'll end up with 4X squared equals, in this case, 49, okay? Get that there into focus. Sorry about that. There we go. All right. Now we must divide by 4. So we end up with X squared equals 49 over 4. My last step is to get rid of the square. So I need to square root both sides, okay? That'll cancel the square out. I'll end up with X equals, now I know it's a fraction, but we learned a long time ago that we can square root the top and the bottom if they're both perfect squares, and they happen to be. What's the square root of 49? It is 7. What's the square root of 4? It is 2. So that's my final answer, right? Or am I missing something? What am I missing? Put it in the chat. Why is the answer not just 7/2? Why is the answer just not 7/2? You can type IDK if you don't know. What am I missing from my answer? If I square root something, good job, Alyssa. It should be a positive and a negative 7/2, okay? So in other words, your answer is a 2-solution answer. It is negative 7/2 and positive 7/2, okay? Excellent job. All right, negative 7/2 and positive 7/2. Excellent, excellent job, everybody. Let's go ahead and move to another example, and this is the completing the square example, okay? We have X squared minus 18X plus 65 equals 0, okay? We come to use this completing the square method. Why? Even though I know that's factorable, but let's just say it wasn't factorable. Why would this be an okay method to use if this wasn't factorable? It actually is, but we're not going to do it that way. Okay, or it might not be, I don't know. But what are the 2 reasons that we would use completing the square? Something has to do with the A term, A coefficient, and something that has to do with the B coefficient, why we would want to do completing the square. I'll give you a few seconds for somebody to type it in the chat. Why would we use? Good job, Francisco. We would use completing the square when a is a 1. In this case, there's a 1 in front of the x squared. There's no number. And b is even. Notice that's negative 18x. All right. So that's that's when you would use that method. Okay. Don't write this down. But let's say you ran into something like this. I'm not focusing on it at all, but let's just say, what would you do here where you do have an even term, but a does not equal 1? Yes, you can use quadratic formula, but you can also just divide everything by 9. So at least you get x squared minus 2x, and it's okay if you end up with a fraction over here. Okay, we can work with fractions because then now we would do x squared minus 2x equals negative 40 over 9, and then we would solve completing the square. But I'm not having you guys do that on this online learning. That's something that we would have done in class, okay? But just in case, if you really like completing the square, and you're like, man, that's an even b term, but that's not a 1 in front of the x squared. You can divide by that to make it a 1. Look at that, it's still even, and it's okay. We can work with fractions, okay? But we're not working that one out. I'm just letting you know that you can still use completing the square even when a doesn't equal 1. But no matter what, you always want a b term. You always want a b term to be even once you simplify. Don't worry about doing that one though. And that was just for you guys to know that there's still a way to use completing the square even when a doesn't equal 1. Back to number 11, the original one we were doing. So in this case, we are going to complete the square. That means we, instead of having 0 on the right side, we actually want to move all the constants, because on completing the square, we're trying to add a constant that will make the left side a perfect square trinomial. Okay, what do I need to do to that 18? You can put it on the chat. I need to complete the square here. So I need to do something to the negative 18 and get a number to fill in the blank. Go ahead and fill in the blank and work it out. And fill in the blank. And then put it in the chat. All right, good job, Jose. It would be 81 because we want to take negative 18. I'm going to do it over here on the side. I'm going to take negative 18. We want to divide by 2, and we want to square it. So negative 18 divided by 2 is negative 9, and negative 9 squared is 81. Correct. Good job. Divide by 2 and square. Good job. So there we go. We have 81. Now we just work each side different. In this case, we can factor that out. Okay. We can do 81 on top, negative 18 on the bottom, right? We also end up with, we will end up with negative 9 as our factor. So this will become x minus 9 squared. Okay. X minus 9 squared. What is negative 65 plus 81? That will come out to be 16. So now we have x minus 9 squared equals 16. And now we can use the square root method. Completing the square goes hand in hand with the square root method, okay? Because we happen to square root here. That's why you learn the square root method, so that you can apply it in the completing the square method. A lot of the word method is being used a lot here. So we cross that out because the square cancels out square root. We have x minus 9. Now what is the square root of 16? It is plus a positive or negative 4. Okay. Then I need to add 9. And we learned that in this case, you're going to do 9 plus 4 and 9 minus 4 to solve for x. Okay. So what does x equal? Well, 9 plus 4 is 13. 9 minus 4 is 5, and that would be your answer. All right, that is the completing the square method. And last, but definitely not least, it is the quadratic formula. Like I mentioned on the video and the lessons, if you cannot do completing the square, or you struggle with that, if you struggle with factoring, and if you struggle with square root method, you're quadratic, but you're good at quadratic formula, you can always use quadratic formula to solve for x, okay? It will work all the time, all right? Real quick, just give me some feedback on the chat. Do you find yourself being the person that will always use quadratic formula because you find that easy? Or are you somebody that will probably always try to do completing the square or factoring on those to solve versus, and only using quadratic formula as his last resort? Give me some feedback just to know where you guys stand with all these methods. Are you for quadratic formula only, or are you like, I like all methods, quadratic formula will only be used as a last resort? Give me some feedback there on the chat just to see where you guys stand with the quadratic formula. Good, Maddie, good. Yes, factoring can be very easy if you understand it, good. And then if you can't factor it, what are you using? Completing the square or quadratic formula? And the reality is sometimes you can't even use completing the square, right? We're actually going to do 15, but if you look at number 16, oh, my phone turned off. There we go. We're not doing 16, but notice that you really can't use completing the square because that's the B term is not an even term, okay? So this will be an example where you probably would want to use and can only use quadratic formula, okay? All right, so, all right, let's go with quadratic formula here. That's good, Cheyenne, that you understand them all and can use them all. That's really good. That's the goal here, to be able to use all the methods to solve, okay? All right, so let's look at number 15, x squared plus 12x minus 24. If we're using the quadratic formula, a equals 1, b equals 12, c equals negative 24. Now we plug it into the quadratic formula. Just to remind myself, remember I said you should probably commit this to memory. Negative b plus or minus b squared minus 4ac. That could be something you tell your kids one day, right? Oh, it was during the year 2020, during the coronavirus, that I memorized the quadratic formula. You'll never forget that. Negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4a times 4ac, sorry, divided by 2a. Okay, so let's put this into practice. Negative b, that would be, in this case, it would be just negative 12. Not like the examples in the lesson that were negative 12. It was just negative 12. Plus or minus b squared, that will be 12 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 24 over 2 times 1, okay? Make sure you fill in the blanks the correct way. Put the numbers in parentheses for the most part. I should have followed my example, and I should have put those in parentheses also, okay? All right. And then last but not least, and now we go ahead and start simplifying. Negative 12 plus or minus, we're going to do 12 squared, which is 144. Okay. Then we do negative 4 times 1 times negative 24. Okay. And then watch how this is the way I do this in my head. Just for those that are wondering, man, how can you do that in your head? Or how can you multiply these without a calculator? Well, notice that 24 is close to 25. 25 times 4 is 100. Okay? So if 4 times 25 is 100, what's 4 times 24? Well, that's just subtracting 1 from every time you multiply. So that's really subtracting 4. So you actually end up with 96. If I confused you, just forget what I said for the last 30 seconds. Continue to use a calculator. So 144 plus 96, okay? And I just looked at the answer key and I'm right. That's another way I can check my answer. Over 2, okay? We continue to simplify the inside. So we do negative 12 plus or minus. In this case, we do 144 plus 96, which comes out to be 240. Okay, square root of 240 over 2. And now we can check if square root of 240, if that's not a perfect square. So what we want to do now is be able to simplify the radical 240. In this case, I'm going to move here to the side a little bit. And I'm going to say, okay, how can I break down 240? What's the perfect square that goes into 240? Okay. Now, for lack of time, I'll go ahead and do it with you. But basically, you would find out that 16 would be your greatest the perfect square. That's the greatest factor inside 240. We simplify that, we end up with 4 radical 15, because the square root of 16 is 4. Now we're going to take that and replace radical 240. So I come down here and I do negative 12 plus or minus 4 radical 15 over 2. Now last but not least, can I simplify this further? Well, since 12, 2, and 4 are all even numbers, I can divide and simplify. What is negative 12 divided by 2? That would give me negative 6. What is 4 divided by 2? Because you can only divide the outside number by an outside number. You cannot do 15 divided by 2. 4 divided by 2 will be 2. So my true answer here is negative 6 plus or minus 2 radical 15. Okay. Now on the quizzes, you will not have to, none of your answers will be radicals. So don't worry about that. But that's the way it could show up in other forms. Now on IXL, you might need to turn this into a decimal. So I'm going to review those steps again. All right, guys, I'm going to review those steps again so you guys are clear on how to do that. So we have, if I need to turn this into a decimal, and that is for the IXL that is due today. So I believe it's the one that has to do with solving by no, wait, let me see. Quadratic formula, is that, no, that one's due next Monday. Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, next Monday. Okay, but when you go to work on it, how do I turn this to a decimal? Well, I want to take 2 radical 15 and turn 2 radical 15 into a decimal first. Okay, so using my phone, hopefully you can see my screen on my phone. I'm going to my calculator and I'm going to do 2 times radical 15. Now, you can't do 2 times radical 15 just like that. The way you got to do it on a calculator is you got to just do the square root of 15 first. Okay, that's 15, and then I hit the square root button. The square root, so the square root of 15 is 3.87298, and so forth and so forth, an irrational number. Then this is when I would multiply by 2. So I end up with 7.7459 and so forth. Now, because when you read IXL, it says round to the nearest hundredth. Here is the moment where you can round to the nearest hundredth. In this case, you're going to round this to 7.75. Okay, that 5 makes that 4 go up. The 4 in the hundredth place go up to 5. So now going back to my my paper, I'm going to have -6. Let me open up my camera here. Let me turn it. There we go. Now I have -6 plus 7.74 or -6 minus 7.74. Then I would just do the math. What is -6 plus 7.74? Well, x equals, in this case, 1.74. And then what is -6 minus 7.74? That is -13.74. On the quizzes, you won't have to turn to decimals. But the IXL, I believe, as you get into the higher numbers, you do need to turn to decimals, okay? So just giving you that heads up, or that, how to be able to go from a radical to a decimal. One last problem, guys, where you will see where you have to do this are on projectile motion questions, okay? This is the last question that we're doing today. Looking at number 2, it says an apple is launched directly upward at 64 feet per second from an 80-foot tall platform. The equation for the apple's height, h, at time t seconds after launch is h equals -16t squared plus 64t plus 80. We're going to skip the maximum height. And we're simply going to go into how many seconds will it take for the apple to reach the ground. Well, what does that mean? That means that the height happens to be 0. So we can take this equation and basically turn it into, I'm going to write it up here, 0 equals -16t squared plus 64t plus 80, okay? Because if it's hit the ground, the h now becomes 0. So we're trying to find how many seconds. Now we're solving for t in this case, all right? Well, if we're trying to solve for t, that's like solving for x on the quadratic equation, and it's set to 0, so we're basically solving for t. Best thing to use here, I would say, is to go ahead and use the quadratic formula. So we're going to do this with the quadratic formula. So a equals -16, b equals 64, and c equals 80, okay? Now let me grab another piece of paper here, and we can use that as, so we have plenty of room to work this one out. All right. So we're going to have negative, once again, quadratic formula is -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a, all right? Now let's work it. So now we do -16. Now we're going to replace the numbers here. -b, that will be not 46, 64. My bad on that, guys. Thank you, Emma. So we do -64 plus or minus 64 squared. I should have put those in parentheses. Minus 4 times -16 times 80. Okay. Over 2 times -16. Okay. All right. Now let's calculate that. We're going to get -64 plus or minus 64 squared. All right. I'm going to use my laptop for a calculator. So, but if you guys are doing it on you have access to a calculator, you can do this with me. All right, I'll do it for me. Let me know what you got as an answer. What is 64 squared? All right, I get a big number, 4,096. Okay. Now I'm going to do -4 times -16 times 80. So that's -4 times -16 times 80. I get 5120. We're getting those big numbers, and it's okay. Don't be afraid of big numbers. Divided by -32, which is 2 times -16. Let's continue now, because now what we want to do is simply add the numbers inside. So we have -64 plus or minus the square root of 4,096 times plus 5,120. You get a big number, 9,216, and then -2. Okay. Let's find now the square root of 9,216. So 9, I'm doing this on my calculator. And actually happens to be a perfect square number. That's good. We end up with 96 over -32. Let me move this up so you can see it there. All right, guys. Now it's simple math. Okay. We're going to do -64 plus 96. Well, what's -4 plus 96? -64. Let me do this. So -64 plus 96, we get 32 over -32, and then -64 minus 96. So -64 minus 96, and we get -160 over -32. Let's simplify that. 32 divided by -32 becomes -1. -160 divided by 32 becomes +5. Now, so my answer is -1 and 5. That is the seconds. But if we're talking about seconds, can we have a negative time? The answer is no. There's no such thing as negative time. So to answer this question, how many seconds will it take? We wouldn't answer -1 seconds. We would say 5 seconds. Okay? So when you do that one quadratic formula question on quizzes, then know that you are going to need to give me the positive number. All right, guys, you can always go back and watch these videos. I always post the links. Please do not move. I need to take attendance, and the way I'm taking attendance is by taking a picture of your name, okay? And then that way I can give you guys all the credit for being in the class today. All right. All right, guys, I am here to help. All right, remember when you do the quizzes, try to do it all in one sitting because you really can't go back. But you are allowed to go back and do the quizzes, okay? Now, this particular quizzes that we're doing, that I'm assigning with this lesson, has open-ended. So you don't know if you get them right or wrong at the end. It'll just mark it as correct. So, but it's open-ended, meaning that you actually got to type in your answer, something unique that quizzes just did. And I'm like, let's try it out for this. So when you type in your answers, doesn't matter how you type it in, I still got to go back in and check it and let you know. I'll try to check those quicker in case you did really bad. You get a chance to go back and do it, because whether you knew it or not, you can do quizzes more than one time. All right, and always go for a better score. So I try to be more on top of that as you do them. Okay, please make sure you check EDSB, find out what's due today, especially if there's a quizzes due today. You don't want to wait till tomorrow. That code would expire. If you need a new code for any past due quizzes, please let me know. Let me go ahead before you leave, give you the quizzes code through here, that one that will be due next Wednesday. And then I'll post them on EDSB later. Okay, guys, let me go here. Remember that I can always help you, okay? Please reach out to me. Please send me a message. If you need to do a one-on-one Zoom, we can schedule one. That way you understand what you're doing, okay, guys? Here's the quizzes code. It is posted. It is 26. Oh, wait. I only posted it for one student. It is 261899. 261899. I just posted that there. I think I can share my screen. You can see on the screen also 261899. All right. Make sure, let me see which ones I have open. So like the one due today, the completing the square one, that's code 076273. Okay, that's the one that's due today. Hopefully you've done that one already. If you haven't, make sure you get it done today. That code would expire. Once again, the one for that's due in 1 week from today, 261899. All right, guys. Have a great day. If you need to ask any questions, I'm going to stay on for a few minutes.